Hello, and welcome to Queer Legends and Oral History Podcast. This is a story that many of us LGBTQ and Two-Spirit people can relate to. Being discriminated against because of our sexualities. Being fired from our jobs we were great at, because of our sexualities. This story begins in the 1980s. It's about a courageous young woman in the Canadian military. She was an officer and a rising star at a time when there were very few women in the Canadian Forces to begin with. Her name is Michelle Douglas. She was discharged from her position in the military for being a lesbian. She fought back, and her case helped bring an end to the Government of Canada's so-called LGBT Purge. To get started, I asked her to tell me, who was Michelle Douglas before all of this?
Before I joined the Canadian Armed Forces, I was a mediocre student, keen to be involved, had a pretty narrow view of the world, not tons of experience. I have a loving family. The idea of being a lesbian had never crossed my mind.
And you were growing up in Ottawa or Nova Scotia or both, was it?
Really, at that point, we'd moved from Nova Scotia to Burlington, Ontario. My father was a senior public servant and worked there before eventually, of course, all roads seemed to lead to Ottawa, and my family returned there eventually. But yeah, I signed up for the military at the Hamilton, Ontario recruiting station. So, I have them to thank or blame, I'm not sure.
You graduated from law in Ottawa, right?
Well, it's an undergraduate law degree from Carleton University. And, as it turns out, law has been a pretty central kind of pillar of my life, either fighting it, working around and with it, and using it as a tool for activism. So, yeah, it turns out that I might have been onto something when I picked the nature of my education.
When you joined the military, why did you choose military for the public service? Can you walk me through that?
I really decided I wanted to be a police officer, actually. I thought that seemed to be a nice combination of helping people, participating in my community, and the kind of fitness teamwork thing that appealed to me. So I started applying to places, RCMP, my municipal police force, and I thought, oh yeah, the military, they have military police. I'll apply there. And as it turned out, the military called me back quickly. It seems that if you turn up at a recruiting center, they are keen to close the deal. So
were they more interested to close the deal with you because you were also a woman?
It may well have been. It didn't really cross my mind at the time what might be appealing to them about me. But I had a university degree by that point and was keen to be part of something bigger than myself. And I found the idea of service in the military to be quite compelling, important, and has to be done by somebody unless we live in a pacifist world, which, well, I think we see today as we're doing this interview is not the case. So I also kind of had this idealistic idea of Canada, military, peacekeeping. Those were kind of things that appealed to me. And I thought, yeah, I can be part of that.
But we were doing a lot of peacekeeping back in that particular era too, right? So that was a big influence.
We were, and it was influential for me. And it just had this immense appeal about seeing the world and participating in something that was, important and valued. And I thought I could contribute to it. But I should say, I wasn't super introspective about the rationale of pursuing a career in the military. Would someone be against this? Would someone have critique about it? That wasn't where I was as a very young, I think I was 23 at the time, 22 or 23.
You didn't join up to be a hero.
Of course I didn't. I wouldn't have crossed my mind.
So then you go through school the military. You graduated the top of your class.
I did. Yeah. You know, it's funny.
You're being a little humble at a moment. Like, quite frankly, I would expect you to be tooting your horn. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, girl, you just topped the class in the military, and there were very few women. I'm guessing there was you and like how many other women?
Right. I think there were 5 other women in my officers training class, and a good number of them lesbians, I should just say, as it became clear. Yeah, right. Lesbians were attracted to the military in uniforms. I know it's shocking, everyone listening. But, you know, I think the thing for me was I had been a keen but pretty mediocre student. Like, I was like the deputy prime minister of my high school. I loved student politics. I was involved in like the anti-cruise missile work on Parliament Hill when I was in university. Like, you know, I was kind of wanted to be part of things and, you know, that were important. So with the finishing the top of my class, you know what the combo was, right? Like the military adds forces discipline and, well, just carves out time where you have to do nothing but study and prepare. And when you add that bit of, water to this little flower, I just bloomed like nobody's business. And, you know, I was excelling there and excelling. And
Did you have role models of other women to look to in the military, or were you kind of like first batch?
Oh no, there were many who went before, and they would have had I think a much tougher time. We were I joined in 1986, so Section 15 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms was active. We lots of pioneers went before, even thinking about women in World War II, for example. But I came to see some folks certainly in a role model kind of way as I was in the military, and thought, yeah, I like that higher rank. I'm going to pursue that and kind of chase it.
You were excelling already at everything that you were doing. Yeah,
I was, shockingly, because that really wasn't like, if there was somebody to come in fourth when I was in high school and university, that was me. I was like 4th place in the game, but, just slightly, off the podium.
That just means you didn't really like the game. Once you got into the military, that's the game you wanted to be playing.
Maybe
and then they asked you to join Special Investigations Unit, which was a big deal.
It was a Special Investigations Unit promotion for me because I had done so well, top of my class, and I think I had heard that I was the second woman officer to ever be posted to that unit, pretty prestigious. They did things like investigate the most serious forms of criminality, right? Sabotage, subversion, espionage, and investigate allegations of homosexuality.
So you're going to investigate yourself, huh?
Well, I didn't really have an identity as being lesbian.
I was going to ask you that. Like, is that something you had already been identifying as internally? Like, or was it like that's when you discovered yourself in the military?
No, it's really in the military. And I met a fellow officer and really fell in love with her. And she was super compelling. And I just fell for her. And then it became, big trouble, of course, because once there's a rumor out, they chase that down. People at that time in the military had positive obligations to report people they suspected of being gay or lesbian or bi.
Were they following you at this point? Like, was there ever a thought in your mind maybe that you got transferred there so they could just keep closer tabs on you?
No. I thought it was, the military doesn't even, the career advancement people have no idea what's probably going on behind the scenes, which was kind of terrifying because there I am in a bit of a lion's den, fearful. People knew I was posted there. And you're
only 25 years old at this point, right? Like you're 25, 26.
24, 25, right? Like, and people were terrified then that I was a plant and that I was going to come after them. And, it turned out that I never did conduct any of these investigations because I became subject to them very quickly myself. So, I really was just learning. I had just received my commission as an officer, had done French language training, finished off my career course to become a security officer within the military police, posted to this unit at CFB Toronto. I didn't know very much about the military yet. Like, I had just done the training, right? And then it was shortly after arriving that I was, pulled aside by my own boss and subjected to interrogation.
Wow. What did they ask you? Like, is this something that's like you're passing by the water cooler? By the way, Michelle, I have a question for you. Or was this sort of, no. Bright lights, small room, like in the movies?
It was those things. And I'm really sensitive about it because a lot of people went through this and it's painful. It's a hard memory, even now, like 31 years later or something like that. It's hard for me to think back. So what they did was they took me in an undercover K car out to a big hotel near the airport strip in Toronto. That was the start of my series of interrogations. I was there for 2 days being interrogated by two men about my sexual orientation, about who else I might know that happened to be gay or lesbian.
Did you know anyone else at this point?
Oh yeah, I knew lots of women.
So you were not going to give them up.
That's actually a really, your question is really interesting. And I'm going to show you why I didn't give them up. But many who came under intense police interrogation did tell about others they knew. And, so you're like, you didn't give them up. Well, actually, I didn't, but that's not so heroic. I could have.
And I didn't mean it as a judgment either. It was just...
No, I understand, but I really want people to hear that sometimes people did. And because they were broken, probably in some cases, I would be much older than some people experiencing this. Some people are 18 or 19 from, come by chance Newfoundland who are experiencing a sexuality part of their lives for the first time and are, being interrogated by police.
The brunt of the military suddenly coming down.
Yeah. And, they were lost. And, I fought back at times in that interrogation, and I know this because I can hear myself and see myself in tape from that interrogation, which I later obtained as part of disclosure. And what I see is a young 23-year-old woman with a strong, hearing me, I sound like a person with a strong East Coast accent, and ask them at one point, and what would be so wrong with being gay anyway? Once people know what you've done to me, who would ever reveal themselves or come out? And I'm crying, I'm sobbing, I'm broken. And am I allowed to? I was going to swear, but
yes,
anyway,
drop an F-bomb or whatever bomb you want to drop.
I hold that against them, right? And these were horrendous times that have had for me lifelong impacts. And
they wanted you to take a lie detector too on top of all this, right?
I did. I was, ultimately I was interrogated many times, and I denied it, but finally I was flown from Toronto to Ottawa, and while seated, strapped up to a lie detector machine in a military, in the Special Investigations headquarters of Ottawa, I said, I give up, right? Yes, I'm gay. And then it became, tell us everyone you know. And I wouldn't.
What did they do when you admitted to being gay? Do they have a?
They freaked out.
Did they have a protocol for that?
They freaked out because I don't think they expected me to come clean quite that easily. And then they seemed unsure what to do with me. They sent me home for many. I think a couple of weeks while they said, we have to figure out what to do with you.
So when the interrogations are all going on for these number of weeks, I'm assuming at this point, you're not doing any work any longer. They've put you off on leave and they're busy going through your garbage.
Yeah, I'm not that flip about this. I hear why you're saying it that way.
No, and listen, I don't mean it. I apologize if that came off as flippant. I really didn't
No,
mean it to come across that way.
I just want to tell you how I feel about it, which is like, oh my God. I was pretty shattered by what they'd done. And I don't really have the most clear memory of, like, I don't know if they were going through my garbage. I don't know. I was at home in a rental apartment off the base trying to, like, I was in shock. They forced me to come out to my family. Listen, I had just been in a relationship with a woman. I didn't have politics or identity or community about being queer and LGBT. All I knew was that I thought she was the bee's knees, and now I'm losing my job. I'm in trouble with the police. I've had an interrogation. I've been asked sexual questions. Like, what? So, I'm not saying that I think the question was wrong, but I just have a hard time framing it in anything other than the most kind of serious of tone. So that's why I'm like, I just can't see. I don't know what they were doing. So thanks for letting me kind of explain what I meant by that, not challenging how you were coming across, but how I recall that time. It was a misery, I'll tell you that.
I can only imagine what that was actually like back in the 80s. So I just had this vision of, Keystone Cop, MPs.
Oh, they were. Yeah, but I didn't track so much what they were doing. I was like kind of in shock. I do know that I was stunned by kind of like pervy, sexualized questions about what women did together. Feeling like super violated by that, and just like, guys, knock it off, And
you probably had to go through a lot of bullying as you were going through training and everything, along with the bullshit you're dealing with at work.
Of course I did. And what I didn't know at the time, but know now, is just what a common experience it was.
You ended up leaving the military in 89?
So I was released honorably under the discharge code that we called the 5D release, which says not advantageously employable due to homosexuality. That's how I was released.
Sounds really bureaucratic, boy.
Well, and it also underscores the bloody bald forms of discrimination that we were experiencing, right? So I was the top of every military class I ever took. I was a terrific soldier, right?
And promoted quickly for
that. Absolutely. To a certain level. After I
before your homosexuality made you no good at your job anymore.
Right, exactly. So, if you're ever wondering, like, but probably she was no good. That's why she would have been fired in Canada, right? And no.
So you're out of the military. Then I understand there was a human rights discussion with a certain MP. And he fired something in you that got something started. So why don't you tell me that story?
Well, I met Canada's first openly gay member of Parliament, Svend Robinson, someone who I'm happy to fully disclose at this moment is a very long-term dear friend, someone I love very much. But at the time, I was really intimidated to talk to a member of Parliament, like frightened. Imagine speaking to an MP, like, oh my goodness, you don't do that kind of thing. If you're someone like me, you don't talk to people like that.
So I contacted Svend Robinson to get his side of the story.
And after I finished my speech, and we had questions and comments and so on, this young woman came up to me.
I did go up to him at the end of a Ryerson Polytechnic, as it then was. He was giving a lecture.
And she said, Mr. Robinson, very shy. I mean, I remember it like yesterday. She said, Mr. Robinson, she said, I need to talk to you about this because I'm actually one of the people that's affected by this.
And I spoke to him and I said, listen, I'm an officer in the military. I'm about to be fired because I'm lesbian and I'm in real trouble. And his kind of demeanor was like, oh my God, first of all, I've been looking for people like you.
So I said to her, look, absolutely, I'll do whatever I can to support you, Michelle.
Contact me right away. I'll help you. I need to talk to you. And he asked me my name and I told him. And then, of course, I was terrified to call him. Like, how would I do that? Like, find him in a phone book? You don't Google people like that. So back in the day. So anyway,
I think it was at least a month later. It was within that month, roughly, right? I was out in British Columbia, and I was invited to speak out in Chilliwack, which is a small community, and there was a military base there. At that time, it's no longer there, but there was a big military base there. And of course, the meeting was in somebody's home. Many of the people there were from the local base, right? And of course, I talked about the story. By the way, I said, I want to tell you about one person that I met recently. A little frustrated because I haven't heard from her. And if any of you have any knowledge of who this might be. And sure enough, a couple of lesbians came up to me after that meeting in somebody's home out in Chilliwack. Said, we think we might know who this is. And so long story short, that's what got us together.
Finally, he contacted me in the officers' barracks, and his first words to me were, Michelle Douglas, why didn't you call me back? I told you to.
I was going to ask you about this because I saw it in a video of him, and he's like, she blew me off for 2 weeks.
I was devastated, right? I think what I want people to know is that you don't go through an experience like this and it doesn't touch you, it doesn't have an impact. Like, this is
You were still reeling.
Right, of course. And I was about to be fired. I had to come out to my family. Anyway, Svend said,
I'm so happy to connect with you. Let's meet. And I said, I know just a really terrific lawyer.
And that person was Clayton Ruby, the amazing, incredible lawyer from Toronto who's done a lot of human rights work and is an incredibly kind and generous man. He and his spouse, they cared for me. They put their arms literally and metaphorically around me and said, like, if you want to take this forward, if you want to move in a legal way forward with this, you have a great case and we can help you. And are you okay? Right? Like, lots of support with this person who is young, lost, not employed, trying to figure it out.
You realize you're none of those things anymore, right?
Yeah, I'm not actually.
How has that struggle turned you into the person you are today?
I think so. You know, there was a moment when Clay Ruby said, so what will it be? Will you do this lawsuit? Will you sue the military? And I remember at the time thinking, like, I was shocked when the word yes came out of my mouth and that I would do it.
Why? Why would that shock you that you would stand up for yourself in that way?
Because I was broken, because I didn't have a queer identity. Because
you had your identity.
The public. Yeah. It wasn't really like that. You know, I was young and no community and didn't know other gay people really in any kind of way outside of the military. It was my first job. I'd just been fired from it.
And now you've got backup and you're heading into court, it sounds like.
Yeah, that happened. But okay, so an interesting twist was, but it just shows you the kind of kindness of people along the way. And so they were like, well, the media is going to call them. I'm like, well, I can't have my name in the press. And they're like, no, court cases are public. You know that. Come on. And I'm like, yeah, well, I need to do this anonymously. And they're like, yes, so no way, but it's not really how it works. So, and I'm like, well, I don't want to be out as lesbian, like in such a big way. I have to catch up to identity, right? So think about the amalgam of things that were stewing in my life. So anyway, this Toronto Star reporter is put in touch with me, Michelle Landsberg. Michelle Landsberg is, of course, an incredible feminist, activist, writer, journalist, and just an awesome person. And she talked to me and she said, well, I want to tell your story. I want to say that you're taking this case. But you know what? I'll agree to not write under your name. And she said she extended me this grace that she certainly didn't have to professionally. And she called me Miriam X in this article, the very first story written about my case. And, you know, her gentleness, her grace, her guidance helped me, right? When I kind of needed it. I didn't do another anonymous interview after that. She, by rights, should have had the first one with my name, but she agreed to do it because, you know, her professional decency was such. And I'll never stop thanking her for it. She's amazing.
She
what
saw
a family,
the weight of
too.
that story. She saw the importance of that story. So
She did. So that was the twist that I was talking about, John.
So you launched this suit, and tell us a little bit about how that goes and how it builds momentum and eventually leads to settlement.
You know, I'm learning from my legal team that the military's panicking because you have an amazing bloody case here. And also, you know, politics is involved, right? Think of political leadership. Who was in charge at the time? Brian Mulroney as prime minister. So this would be the early 1990s. And there's a lot going on in the country as well at that time. So we have a relatively new Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So people are using that to bring their cases forward and talk about things being unconstitutional. And at the same time, politically, we have things like the Charlottetown Accords, October 1992. So there's a lot happening, and HIV and AIDS is, raging, and a devastation for our community around this time. So we're looking for our rights. We're trying to get into the hospital rooms with our same-sex partners. You know, all of that is happening. We don't have marriage equality. We barely have equal access before the law in many ways. So we do this work behind the scenes, and then we realize that much later, actually, but I now know that there was a lot going on in the political front, and they didn't think because of the charter that they could win. So on the eve of what was to be a 3-week trial in federal court, the government said, we're going to settle with you. We're going to give you a substantial financial sum. We are going to write the policies of the past. So that's RIGHT, not rewrite, WRITE. But I guess they did both. And the way they kind of corrected what had happened was the policy in the military had been to freeze everyone who was identified as gay. If they didn't want to be kicked out, they could potentially stay with no pay raise, no promotions, no training, or no postings. So people who were subjected to that policy got their back pay, got promotions to their proper grade, and had some measure of their dignity restored. It formally took off the books the policy I talked about called 5D, not advantageously employable due to homosexuality. It struck that particular provision. And yeah, it was justice for me, that's for sure. But remember I talked about earlier that there were actually many, many people who experienced discrimination. I didn't know about them then, but I sure know about them now.
We're talking thousands of people.
We're talking thousands. So I had experienced what we now call the LGBT Purge, an imperfect title because obviously it limits the kind of inclusion that we talk about in today's term. But the LGBT Purge mostly involved lesbians, bisexuals, and gay men. Transgender people were so marginalized that usually they were driven from the military under medical releases or never permitted in the first place. LGBT, purge had its own levels of discrimination about who was even purged at the time. Some people were so marginalized they wouldn't even have started to serve in the military yet.
How did you go from your individual victory and then some changes in policy to then going into the class action suit?
Fast forward from 1992, the ending of the ban on gays in the military, right? Like I became an activist. I was using the Charter of Rights and Freedoms with many others to intervene in legal challenges in support of others. So you think of the M versus H case, the Delwyn-Vriend case, and equal marriage ultimately. So that's what I was doing. I was also working for the federal government again.
I was just going to say, like, in the meantime, you've gone from being this young lesbian sort of, attacked from all sides to someone who is a very well-respected public servant in the federal public service who is working, as you say, Department of Justice.
That's right.
How does this work?
Yeah, it's only in Canada, I think, that this would have been possible. Obviously, it's not like I was hiding my past. It was very well known. But I really followed proper channels and filed extensive conflict of interest declarations. Also, government is what I knew. My dad was a federal public servant for 35 years. It's kind of the idea of service is a huge pillar in my life. And I recognize it now more than I ever did back when I joined the military. But it's an important thing for me. And I really value and respect and honor service to others through work in the federal public service, the RCMP, and the military. I know it's not for everyone. I'm not a Pollyanna. I understand the politics and the critiques that are rightly brought to these institutions. Of course, I understand those. And I've thought deeply about them now in the many intervening decades. That's right. I worked for them and I sued them. What an interesting history I never expected to have.
How long did that case take again?
Fast forward in 2017, 2018, all of the other survivors of the Purge gathered together and brought a class action lawsuit, which ultimately, again, was settled by the federal government. And that settlement was announced on the eve of the November 2017 apology by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. I should say that I had a pretty big honor that day and sat in the seat directly across from him in the front row of the visitors gallery in the House of Commons. And I'm not more heroic than others. I'm more well known because of my case back in 92. But I get a standing ovation from, I think, every member of the House that day. And so did Svend Robinson. And I'm glad that those were the two standing O's that happened that day. And they meant things for both of us that are pretty deep.
Is it okay if we go back to that moment in the House?
Sure.
I mean, I can see in your face the wheels are going and you're thinking about that moment, and it clearly means something deep to you on your face. I was wondering if you could maybe tell that to our listeners. What do you feel when you think about that, the Prime Minister apologizing?
It was a profound moment for me. It felt like justice. I was glad I was part of something bigger then, because justice for one and not for all is actually quite hollow. So this was starting to feel like some measure of justice for all. It was really a special time. I felt it deeply inclusive and sincere. I know it was not a perfect apology to some, but boy, did it hit the high notes for me.
And now you've got the Purge Fund. You've got a memorial on the way, an exhibit at the Human Rights Museum.
Yeah, all those
Let's
things.
touch on these things briefly.
Well, there were thousands purged. Many of them died or didn't live to see the day of justice. So they set aside up to $25 million for reconciliation and memorialization measures. Here, we established the LGBT Purge Fund, which I'm now the executive director of, and I'm like full time on this. This is my job now to implement 5 main things. I'm just going to tell you them because I think they're exciting. We are building the LGBTQ2+ National Monument in Ottawa. It's not a monument just to the oppression of the Purge. It's bigger. Then
I filled in the survey.
Thank you for doing that. We worked hard to get as many people to do that. And
we started this with you saying you didn't sign up to be a hero. What do you think now?
I don't see myself that way. I am even an accidental activist.
If I could roll my eyes any harder, they'd be scooping out the underside of my brain, girl.
I don't like it. But the idea of that, but I came along at the right time and didn't say no, and then stood up and learned along the way. Understanding that, hey, I might be getting towards the lesbian elder kind of thing, and really that's exciting.
You know, I joined the Federal Public Service in 2001. My first Director General of Communications was an out gay man. He was a great boss, he was a total queen, and he's someone who I looked up to professionally and who I tried to be like as a manager. He was respected by everybody who knew him. And even though the LGBT Purge was over, that didn't mean that homophobia had vanished from the Federal Public Service, something I discovered at my next 2 departments. I left the public service in 2013 for greener pastures and that promotion I should have had years earlier. Yes, things have gotten better, but there's still work to do, especially for Canadians who are Black, Indigenous, or queers of color. Thank you for listening. This episode is a Secret Agents production, researched, written, recorded, and produced by me, Sean Dern. The executive producer is Ian Capstick. Queer Legends, an oral history podcast, is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you go for great storytelling.